Judas believed that that was the way of God, right?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that he was trying to get rich necessarily, or trying to become powerful. I think he really believed that that's what the Messiah was supposed to do, and he had Bible verses that could back that up. You know, he would go to Psalm 2, and he would go to some of these other places, and I'm going to raise up a king like David, right? And so I think he really thought he was doing the will of God, potentially in forcing Jesus into this position where he would have to act, and that's almost scarier, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
To fully believe.
Yeah. And not to mention,
yeah.
he'd heard too that Jesus say that he was going to die. You know, he was expecting that. So I think to your point, yeah, he was trying to speed it up.
Based on what you said, Thomas, about Judas, what's interesting about Peter is seems to be a similarity in how they see Jesus. They're just on different sides of what seems to be a similar coin. So that kind of stuck out to me as Peter was participating in that uprising, but Christ was essentially resisting or restraining himself from leveraging that power that he clearly says he has.
Well, interesting that you mentioned Peter, because I think Peter also had a similar expectation of Jesus, right? And back in the scene in Matthew 16, where Peter identifies Jesus as the Messiah, and then Jesus says, I'm going to die. And Peter says, nah, Messiahs don't die. And then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. What I think is fascinating, I think you're right. There's a close parallel between Judas and Peter, where Peter takes his frustration and his concern directly to Jesus, right? And rebukes Jesus. And we sort of laugh at his haughtiness. Ha, 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 how dare you rebuke Jesus, right? But Judas deals with his disappointment in isolation, and he turns to people who aren't in that crowd. And so I think there's a sermon there on the way that we deal with disappointment, right? Do we bring our disappointment directly to God, or do we internalize and try to deal with it on our own and turn to people who are outside of that for comfort and support and direction? But I think it's a fascinating observation that they were sort of similar on the same path and dealt with it in different ways.
And there was a tension or a rejection that Christ should suffer, or Christ would do that, and he rebukes them, and to think, in the scene you described that happens earlier, where he rebukes him, get behind me, Satan, and when he rebukes him here, essentially, if Peter were successful, he would have prevented the redemption of all of us, right? And that's a pretty big deal. So what's interesting about that is just how little we know what's happening on the grand scale, and how much we think we know to be able to assert things to drive towards a result that we have no idea how it plays into the larger story of our life, or the people we're intervening for, or our community, or our society, or the world, right? It's just humbling, I guess, as what I would say when I see that.